The words asking for leftovers cut through the warm noise of the restaurant like ice through skin, and in that instant the single father's hand stopped mid-motion, his breath catching as if the past had reached out and grabbed him by the chest. He had come here for a quiet meal, a rare pause between school pickups, unpaid bills, and nights spent calculating how long his strength could last. He never expected that a simple request for discarded food would reopen wounds he had buried under responsibility, grief, and love for a child who depended on him for everything. Before the story unfolds any further, take a moment to like this video, comment, share it with someone who believes in kindness and second chances, and subscribe to channel name if you feel that small acts of humanity still matter in a world that often forgets them. He was a single dad not by choice but by circumstance, a man who had once dreamed loudly and lived boldly, now moving quietly through life with the careful steps of someone who could not afford to fall. His days revolved around his daughter's schedule, her school lunches carefully packed, her shoes repaired again and again because new ones were always just out of reach. That night, the restaurant represented something rare, a small reward after a week of overtime and exhaustion, a place where he could sit without rushing and pretend, just for an hour, that life was not constantly asking him for more than he had. The lights were soft, the smell of food rich and comforting, and for a moment he allowed himself to breathe. Then he noticed her. She stood a few steps away, thin in a way that spoke not of fashion but of hunger, her coat too large and worn smooth at the edges, her posture polite yet guarded. She did not beg loudly or draw attention to herself. She waited until plates were being cleared, her voice barely rising above the clatter of dishes. When she asked if anyone had leftovers they did not want, the room shifted. Some people looked away. Others stiffened, uncomfortable, as if poverty were contagious. The single dad felt something inside him tighten, because he recognized that quiet dignity. He had worn it himself in darker days. He froze because her eyes met his, and in them he saw a reflection of a life he might have lived if one more thing had gone wrong. They were not empty eyes. They were alert, intelligent, and heavy with stories that had never been told. For a man who had learned to suppress his emotions for survival, the sight struck deeper than he expected. His first instinct was practical, almost automatic. He wondered if he had enough cash, if he could spare more than just food without risking tomorrow. Being a parent had trained him to think this way, every choice weighed against consequences that stretched far beyond himself. As he watched her move carefully from table to table, thanked politely and stepped back when refused, the restaurant seemed to fade. Memories rose uninvited, of nights when he had eaten so his daughter would not know hunger, of mornings when hope felt thinner than his wallet. He remembered the day his world had cracked open, the accident that took his wife, the months afterward when grief and responsibility collided, leaving him standing alone with a child and a future that felt terrifyingly fragile. He had rebuilt himself piece by piece, trading ambition for stability, risk for routine, love for duty, and though he never regretted his choices, they had cost him parts of himself he rarely acknowledged. Something shifted as the woman reached his table. He could see the effort it took for her to ask, the way she kept her hands still, the way her shoulders remained straight even as vulnerability pressed in. This was not entitlement. This was survival wrapped in respect. He gestured to the untouched portion of his meal, the part he had planned to save for tomorrow's lunch. As she accepted it with quiet gratitude, a warmth spread through him that surprised him more than the loss of food. It was not charity he felt. It was connection. But the story did not end with a plate passed across a table. As she turned to leave, something compelled him to speak further, not with words of pity but with questions born of genuine concern. He learned that she had once been a teacher, that a string of misfortunes had unraveled her life, that pride had delayed her from asking for help until hunger left her no choice. Each detail added weight to the moment, transforming it from a brief act of kindness into a crossroads. The single dad felt the familiar pull between caution and compassion, the same tension he faced every day as a parent, deciding when to protect and when to trust. He did not see himself as wealthy, but by the world's measures, he had become something close to a millionaire through years of relentless work and sacrifice. That success had come quietly, without celebration, because his focus had never been on status. It had been on security. Yet in that instant, his resources felt suddenly meaningful in a way numbers never had. He saw an opportunity not to rescue, but to restore. The challenge was knowing how to help without taking away her dignity, how to open a door without pushing her through it. Their lives began to intersect in small, careful ways. He helped her find temporary work, not as a favor but as a recommendation rooted in respect. She repaid every kindness with effort, showing up early, learning quickly, refusing shortcuts. Watching her rebuild stirred something inside him he thought was long gone. It reminded him that people were more than their worst moments, that circumstances could bury talent but not erase it. For his daughter, the woman became a quiet example of resilience, someone who smiled despite hardship, someone who proved that falling did not mean staying down. The single dad faced his own struggles through this process. Opening his life, even slightly, meant risking emotional exposure he had avoided for years. He worried about boundaries, about expectations, about the fragile balance he had constructed to keep his world safe. There were nights when doubt crept in, when he questioned whether helping others might destabilize the careful structure holding his family together. Yet each time he saw progress, each time he witnessed gratitude without dependence, his fears softened. Change came gradually, like dawn rather than lightning. The woman found stability, then independence. His daughter gained confidence, seeing compassion modeled not as weakness but as strength. And the single dad himself rediscovered a sense of purpose beyond survival. He realized that success measured only by accumulation was hollow, that meaning emerged when resources met responsibility. The restaurant encounter became a quiet turning point, not because it solved everything, but because it reminded him of who he had been before loss taught him to shrink his heart. Near the end of this story, if it is touching something inside you, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to channel name. Your engagement helps stories like this reach hearts that may be waiting for exactly this reminder. As the years passed, the memory of that night remained vivid. Not the food, not the setting, but the moment of recognition between two people standing on different edges of the same struggle. It taught him that kindness did not require abundance, only awareness, and that second chances often arrived disguised as interruptions. The woman never forgot the dignity with which he treated her, and he never forgot the courage it took for her to ask for help. Their paths eventually diverged, as many do, but the impact lingered, woven into the fabric of their lives. Before this story ends, we have a special request. Please comment below with the word kindness if you believe one small act can change a life, or share your own experience of a moment that restored your faith in humanity. In the quiet after the storm of life, the single dad often reflected on how close he had come to missing that moment entirely. He could have looked away. He could have protected himself with indifference. Instead, he chose connection, and in doing so, discovered that healing did not always come from guarding the heart, but from letting it see clearly. The story leaves us not with a grand gesture, but with a simple truth, that sometimes the most powerful transformations begin when we pause, listen, and respond with humanity.